welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Fernando and Fernanda, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. Fernando and Fernanda, the sole date farm, sat in the heart of a wealthy town near Rio de Janeiro. 10 years ago, it belonged to Commander Faria, who left it to his only son from his first marriage. The boy grew up to be Dr. Amaro de Faria. But there was another child raised in that house, his cousin Fernando, the son of the commander's sister. They shared the same name and also the same childhood. They had been raised together under the care of Madalena, Fernando's mother. When Fernando's father died, Madalena took her nephew in as if he were her own. She loved both children equally, and they grew up side by side, sharing every joy and sorrow. To everyone around them, they looked like brother and sister. And maybe, if not for the way their hearts beat faster when they touched, they could have gone on believing that's all they were. But one day changed everything. Both were 15. They stood beneath an old mango tree behind the house. Their eyes met, and their hands brushed. In that moment, something shifted. "Fernanda," he whispered. "Fernando," she said softly. No more words were needed. Love doesn't always speak with voices. Sometimes it speaks through silence, through a look, a touch, a heartbeat. That was how they understood each other, without needing to explain. It was the kind of love that says everything without saying a thing. Yet young love often forgets that the world is watching. Fernando and Fernanda believed no one would notice what was growing between them. They thought they could hide their feelings, that no one saw how they lingered too long in each other's presence, or how their laughter sounded different when shared alone. But 2 days after that quiet confession under the tree, Madalena noticed. She was a sharp woman, used to handling problems with calm strength. At the time, the three of them were waiting for tea. They sat at a small table in the living room, where Madalena was organizing some papers. These were legal complaints she planned to file in Rio de Janeiro on behalf of her late husband against the government over land issues. The province was far to the north, but Madalena wasn't afraid of travel. If things didn't go her way, she would go to the capital herself. Still, as she sorted the documents, her eyes caught something else: the way Fernanda blushed when Fernando smiled. The way he leaned just a little closer than before. A mother's heart knows these things. Even if the world tries to pretend, love rarely stays hidden for long. Fernando and Fernanda lived in a quiet house on the edge of Rio de Janeiro, not far from where the hills met the city. Their mother, Madalena, was a strong woman who had raised them with great care. She had 2 sons, Fernando, her adopted son, and another boy she had raised as her own. But among all, Fernando and Fernanda were especially close. One afternoon, while they helped Madalena organize some papers, something unusual happened. The 2 young people stood near each other, lost in thought, their eyes meeting more often than needed. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them felt different, full of meaning. Madalena, unaware at first, sat nearby, sorting through documents. She asked Fernando to go to the study and bring a bundle of papers she had forgotten. He did not answer. She repeated the request, still looking down. Again, no reply. She lifted her head, ready to ask a third time, when she noticed the way Fernando and Fernanda looked at each other. It was not just a glance, it was something deeper, something she had seen before in others, but never expected to see in her own children. Raising her voice, Madalena called Fernando again. This time he heard her. He blinked, as if waking up, stood quickly, and went to fetch the papers. Later that evening, they all sat together for tea. Usually, Madalena was the most talkative of them all, full of stories and questions. But that night, she stayed silent. She watched the two young people across from her, how they smiled without reason, how they seemed to forget the world around them. Neither Fernando nor Fernanda understood what was happening to them. At 15 years old, they had lived sheltered lives. They rarely left the house and knew little of the world beyond it. A distant relative of Madalena kind, old priest, had taught them to read and write in several languages and told them stories from the Bible. But his lessons were gentle and old-fashioned, filled with saints and miracles. Love, as spoken of between men and women, had never been explained to them clearly. Even when they read stories like that of Ruth, a tale of deep love and loyalty, they saw it only as a beautiful story, not as something that could happen to them. So now, as they began to feel something new inside, they did not know what to call it. They only knew that being near each other felt like warmth, like joy, like something both wonderful and confusing. And though they did not yet have words for it, their hearts had already begun to change. Fernando and Fernanda had never once asked, not even out of curiosity, what happened in the end between Ruth and the rich man Boaz. For them, Eve, the fruit, and the serpent were not separate figures but the same Eve, the same fruit. The same serpent hidden deep within the roots of humanity, wrapped in the mist of old religious tales. As for the Song of Songs, their teacher, a priest, decided it was best to leave it out of the Bible they studied. Though he believed in the symbolic meaning of Solomon's book, as the Catholic tradition saw it, he felt it was not right to place such words in the minds of Fernando and Fernanda. Because of this, the young hearts of the two lovers never truly understood the feeling that drew them so close. It was nature itself that guided their innocent love, free from worry or consequence. The day after the scene I just told you about, Madalena called the two lovers aside and spoke with them. Her concern was real and fair. Even though they had been raised with care and modesty, she could not know for sure how deep their innocence truly was. To test their hearts and minds felt like a duty she could not ignore. She handled it with care and skill. Fernando and Fernanda, in their honesty, admitted they felt a deep and lasting affection for each other. But they still did not understand the nature or the secret of that affection. Madalena, who had dreamed all her life of this love becoming real, kissed them both, held them close, and promised them happiness. But, she added, as she explained how things would go, my Fernando must grow into a man. He must find a way to earn his living, to take care of his sister. Do you hear me? She began at once to think about what path Fernando might take, and she spoke to the priest as well. She told him what she had learned. The priest was not happy with what he heard. Not at all. Fernando had always been the apple of his godfather's eye. The old priest saw in him not just a student, but a kind of spiritual heir, someone who could carry the torch of faith into the future. In the quiet corners of his mind, he dreamed of sending the boy to a seminary, and from there, into the holy silence of a monastery. "I want to make him a pillar of the church," he told Madalena one day, his voice filled with purpose. "He's bright, he loves the sacred texts, and with the right guidance he could be the St. Paul of this new world." Madalena listened, then shook her head. "That idea needs to leave your mind," she said firmly. She loved the priest, but she loved her son more. After many long talks, and with Fernando sitting quietly between them, they reached a decision. Medicine would be his path. The boy would study the sciences, learn the art of healing, and perhaps, in time, serve humanity in a different way. The news weighed heavily on Fernando. He rushed to Fernanda, his heart full of sorrow and confusion. Together they cried and swore their love would never fade, no matter how far apart they might be. But fate, it seemed, had other plans, kind ones, for a change. Madalena had to travel to Rio de Janeiro to handle some legal papers, and so the whole family packed their bags. A few months later, they were all settled in the capital, except for the priest, who stayed behind. Fernando began his studies with quiet determination. As the years passed, he grew into a young man shaped by books, conversations, and the rhythm of city life. Fernanda, too, changed, becoming more sure of herself and the world around her. With every passing day, their bond deepened. What had once been childish affection now felt like something deeper, something real. They began to dream of marriage, a future together that seemed as certain as the sun rising. They imagined homes, children, quiet evenings by the fire. Their hopes were endless, their plans wild and full of color. They built castles in the air, knocked them down, and built even taller ones. They were young, in love, and blind to the pain life could bring. To them, the world was soft and kind, and nothing, not time, not distance, not fate could stop their dreams from coming true. But dreams, as they would soon learn, are fragile things. When Fernando finally finished his medical training, it was decided. He would travel to Europe. For 2 more years he would study and learn from the best minds across the ocean. It was a chance to grow, to shine, to prepare for the life they both longed for. Yet, with that decision came a quiet ache, the first crack in the castle walls. Fernando's departure was set to last 2 full years, and not just any separation, but one made worse by an ocean, the most terrible kind of barrier. To Fernanda, it felt like a certain and unavoidable danger. Many times she would say to him, almost pleading, "When you are my husband, I forbid you to ever step onto a ship." "I won't," Fernando would reply with a smile. "But the ship will still have to put its keel in the water." Now, the trip was really happening. From the very beginning, Fernanda felt her heart tighten with fear and sorrow. She cried many tears full of sadness and even anger because she could not stop him from going. But it had to be done. Fernando left. Madalena did everything she could to encourage her son and comfort her daughter. In truth, her own heart broke watching him go. For 2 reasons, he was like her real child. Yet she stayed strong, and that strength came from 2 noble feelings. First, that Fernando needed to finish his education, which she had promised to support. Second, that for her beloved Fernanda to have a proper husband, he must return as a complete man, ready for any honorable position. Fernando understood this, and found courage within himself. I do not intend to describe, day by day or scene by scene, all that happened during those long months. He was gone, months in which he studied hard as a doctor and suffered quietly as a lover. Let us skip ahead quickly and begin instead on the very day when Fernando's ship returned to the port of the capital city. Medina welcomed him back as if seeing daylight after years in a dark cell. She asked about everything, eager to hear every small detail, and smiled with joy at each story he told. At last he asked, "But Fernanda, how is she?" His mother said nothing at first. He waited, then pressed her again. "Fernanda is gone," Madalena finally said. "Gone?" Fernando repeated, covering his face with both hands. "She is gone to you," Madalena continued gently. "She has married." She had started with the lesser pain before revealing the greater. And indeed, for Fernando, it would have been better if Fernanda had truly died than to know she now belonged to another man. Fernando felt his heart sink when he heard his mother's words. She quickly tried to comfort him with advice about caution and acceptance, but he wasn't listening. For so long he had built up a dream of perfect happiness, and now a single sentence had destroyed it all. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind: suicide, revenge, escape. Each one took its turn in his troubled head. At the bottom of everything, all he could see was betrayal, the weakness of a woman's heart, mockery, and dishonesty even in the purest souls. At last, Madalena managed to speak and explain the full story behind Fernanda's marriage to the poor, heartbroken young man. Although the story might seem ordinary, it must be told here so that everything can be understood clearly. Fernanda had truly missed Fernando while he was away. She had cried for many days without comfort. Wanting to help her find some peace and distraction, Madalena decided to take her to social gatherings and introduce her to other young women her age. These friendships would surely do her good, calming her heart without ever making her forget the love she felt for the traveler. Until then, Fernanda had lived a quiet and simple life. Suddenly, she found herself in a whole new world. Balls, visits, small friendly meetings followed one after another. Slowly, her sadness began to fade, replaced by a sense of joy that gave Madalena hope. Well, thought the worried mother, this way, Fernanda can wait for Fernando without losing the beauty and spirit of youth. These new relationships, this new social life, would take away her sadness and make her love even stronger, Madalena believed, simply by showing her how others experienced love. Madalena's thinking made sense for a while. But in the end, experience proved that her idea was wrong. Her theory didn't lead to the results she had hoped for in her heart. Fernanda saw how other girls acted, and instead of making her more loyal to the love she had promised, it made her curious. At first, it was just a passing thought. Then it became something stronger: interest. Eventually, it turned into a real desire. She wanted to be like her new friends. And so, she got herself a boyfriend. She had heard some of them say that if a girl didn't have at least one boyfriend, it meant she had no taste and no sense of style. Fernanda didn't want him to be left behind. Among the boys who liked her was a young man named Augusto Soares. His father was rich, which was his first quality. The second was that he was widely known as a bit of a fool. But fools don't wear signs on their foreheads. Yes, Soares could barely put two sentences together without sounding silly. Still, many women are willing to forgive even stupidity when they hear someone praising their beauty. Soares knew how to flatter. That was half the battle. When Fernanda realized he agreed with what she already saw in the mirror, she didn't bother checking for anything else. She gave him her approval not from the heart, but from her mind. Her heart came later. Having a special boy made her feel important. Other boys began chasing her more, trying to win her attention. It was exactly what others were doing, and it felt modern, stylish. From the very beginning, Fernanda played the game well. But who could resist a fool who truly believed in himself? Soares wasn't shy. He never doubted his own worth, even though he had little to offer. He acted like he was brilliant, and that made him dangerous. In fact, he managed to win things that smarter men could only dream of. As Fernando stayed away longer and longer, the words of Soares kept echoing in her head. Slowly, the old love began to fade. Bit by bit, Fernanda's heart moved from the past to the present. And then came comparison, the kind of comparison that ruins everything for women. She started to measure the two men against each other. One was far away, quiet and uncertain. The other was right there, loud, sure of himself, and full of praise. It was not hard to see which way her heart would go. Fernando loved her with all the honesty and simplicity his heart could offer. Soares, on the other hand, loved in a different way. He knew how to mix a confession with 3 long phrases and 2 old figures of speak-ons that already smelled stale from being used too often, but Fernando listened with delight because this was new language to her. In the end, one day, it became clear that Soares had won Fernanda's heart. It wasn't an easy victory. There was some struggle at the last moment. But even that fight was just a final choice Fernanda made on purpose to calm her conscience and put the blame for her betrayal on fate. Fate is always the big excuse people use when they do bad things without meaning to. One day, Soares, who had already quietly asked about Fernanda's money, was finally allowed by her to ask for her hand in marriage. Madalena didn't say yes right away. She wanted to talk to Fernanda first and see how serious she really was about this new decision. Fernanda said she truly loved the young man and insisted that her whole life and happiness depended on marrying him. Madalena felt it was her duty to guide her daughter's heart, which now seemed to be going in the wrong direction. But it was no use. Fernanda wouldn't change her mind. After 3 days of trying, Madalena told Fernanda she agreed to the marriage. Then she sent for Soares and told him the same thing. "But do you know," the kind mother asked her daughter, "do you know what Fernando's heart will feel when he finds out?" "Oh, he'll feel some pain, sure. But after a while, he'll forget." "Do you really think so?" "Why not? Who knows what he might be doing right now? The places he went might already have given him new loves. One woman for another. Fernanda. That's just the truth." "All right then. May God make you happy." And when the cheerful boyfriend arrived, Madalena officially gave him her daughter's hand in marriage. The wedding happened soon after. When Fernando heard the news, he was stunned. His greatest hope, the dream he had held on to as a young man, began to vanish like mist in the air. Fernando had imagined meeting a pure and sincere girl, but now that vision was gone. In its place stood a woman with a deceitful heart and ordinary mind. He couldn't stop a few tears from falling, though there weren't many. When his adoptive mother gently urged him to be strong, Fernando straightened up, wiped his eyes, and promised he wouldn't fall apart. He even tried to seem cheerful. Poor Madalena felt uneasy and worried something might happen. She asked Fernando about his plans. "Oh, don't worry, mother," he replied. "Do you think it'll hurt myself or someone else? I swear I won't do either. Look, I promise on this." And he kissed her gray head with deep respect. Days passed after Fernando's return. Madalena saw his mind slowly calming down, and so did hers. One evening, as Fernando entered for dinner, Madalena told him, "Fernando, did you know Fernanda is coming to visit me today?" He hadn't considered the possibility of Fernanda visiting her mother and possibly seeing him at home. At first he looked surprised. Then he paused for a moment before saying, "What of it? She can come. I'll be here. We're strangers now." Madalena, hearing this, felt certain that Fernando no longer felt anything for her daughter, neither love nor hate. That night, just as Fernando was getting ready to read some travel notes to his mother, a carriage arrived outside. It carried Soares and Fernanda. Fernando's heart pounded hard in his chest. Two tearless last tears escaped his eyes and rolled silently down his face. He wiped them quickly, hiding his pain. When Madalena looked at him again, he seemed completely calm. Then the door opened, and the two guests stepped inside. Fernando and Fernanda met again, and both felt a quiet stir inside. Fernanda had already started to think more clearly about her feelings for Soares. Seeing Fernando, she knew, had come back felt like a quiet reminder of how she had acted. Her past with Fernando stood out in sharp contrast. His presence brought back memories. The early days, the gentle love they once shared, the dreams they built together in the warmth of their home. For Fernando, those same memories returned, but mixed with sadness. He could not ignore how different Fernanda looked now. She had changed completely. Her posture, her gestures, even the way she looked at people all showed a new life, far removed from the woman he once loved. Even the soft, poetic paleness of her face was gone, hidden under heavy makeup that tried too hard to create beauty where it didn't exist. This change came from Soares. When Fernando looked away from Fernanda and turned his eyes toward the man who had taken her from him, he saw exactly what he expected. A shallow, modern type, full of empty charm. Madalena introduced Fernando to Soares, and the two men exchanged polite but cold greetings. Why were they so distant? It wasn't because Soares knew about Fernando and Fernanda's past. That would be wrong to assume. Soares was just naturally cold, the kind of man who only cared about small, unimportant things. As for Fernando, no one could blame him for not wanting to warmly greet the husband of the woman he still loved. The conversation between them all was dull and stiff. Fernando tried hard to seem indifferent, offering polite congratulations to Fernanda and sharing stories of his travels. But Fernanda stayed quiet, answering in short words, never lifting her eyes. Madalena felt ashamed to look at the man who once held her heart and now stood as a living reminder of her lost love. She tried to keep things balanced, using Fernando's coldness to create a safe closeness between their two souls that a third person had torn apart. As for Soares, he remained just as distant as ever, splitting his attention between the conversation and his own thoughts. To a sharp observer, 10 minutes would have been enough to understand Soares completely. And after 10 minutes, Fernando already knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. The visit didn't last much longer than usual. Madalena often walked her daughter home whenever Fernanda came to see her. This time, when Soares offered her a ride in the carriage, Madalena made up a small excuse and politely declined him. Fernando realized she didn't want to put him in the position of also going along to drop Fernanda off. He cut her apology short and said, "Why don't you go, mother? Isn't your house close by?" He looked at Soares while asking this. "Yes, it is," Soares replied. "Then let's all go," Fernando continued. "We'll drop them off and come right back. You don't mind, do you?" Madalena looked at Fernando, reached out her hand, and answered with a grateful gaze. "All right." Then she added, "But I can't leave just yet. I need to pick up a reply in half an hour. I'll join you as soon as I'm free." "Perfect," Soares said. Fernando asked about the location of the house, and then said goodbye to the three of them. They climbed into the carriage and drove away. Fernanda's hand trembled slightly as she gave it to Fernando. His did not. He seemed perfectly calm, untouched by any emotion. As Fernanda left, she couldn't help but sigh. Fernando, however, had no message to collect. He simply didn't want to use anything that belonged to Soares and Fernanda. He wanted to take his mother home, yes, but in a different carriage, one not tied to that couple. Fernando left home after waiting a while, just to make his excuse believable. He got dressed and went out. He called the first carriage he saw and told the driver to take him to Soares' house. Madalena had invited him there for tea. When Fernando heard that, he bit his lip in frustration. But he quickly calmed himself and said he couldn't stay, explaining that he had already had tea with the person who gave him the message he was supposed to deliver. Madalena noticed right away why he refused both the carriage and the tea. At 10:30, she and Fernando were heading back home together. 20 days passed after these events, and every time they repeated Madalena inviting, Fernando refusing, he remained polite, calm, and distant. Madalena, although somewhat at peace, still felt deeply that Fernando had not returned to the cheerful self he used to be. Wanting to bring some joy back into his life, Madalena gently encouraged him to take breaks from his studies and work. She urged him to enjoy some of the fun things young people do. "Why don't you go for walks?" she asked. "Why don't you go to parties? Why don't you attend the gatherings where you're always welcome? Why do you avoid the theater and all the things young people love?" "I don't feel like it," Fernando replied. "I enjoy being alone. It's peaceful." One day, Madalena finally convinced him to go to the opera with her. The show was La Favorita. As the music played, Fernando listened quietly, almost lost in thought. The melodies touched something deep inside him. He was especially moved by the final act. After that night, Madalena managed to take him out more often. Little by little, Fernando started going to dances, plays, and social events again. With each passing week, the pain in his heart began to fade. Time and company helped him forget what had once felt like betrayal, but which, in truth, was a hidden form of love. Soon he could speak to Fernanda without feeling hurt or shy. His indifference now felt real, natural, and free of any hidden emotion. Fernando kept thinking to himself, that heart, so changeable and reckless, could not truly belong to him. If betrayal came later, it would only bring more pain. This philosophical thought was genuine, showing how reason had finally taken control in Fernando's mind, pushing aside the emotional memories of the past. But what about Fernanda? Oh, her situation was completely different. At first, she felt stunned when she saw Fernando again. Then for a moment she regretted everything, especially when she thought he might be dying from sorrow and shame. Later, she grew angry, noticing how cold and indifferent his words and actions seemed. In the end, she was torn by 1,000 conflicting feelings: anger, guilt, and even the urge to get revenge. She wanted to run away from him, yet felt pulled toward the man she had once ignored. As a victim of this inner war between guilt and pride, Soar's wife realized something deep inside her was changing, something powerful was happening in both her soul and her life. Many times, Fernanda had tried to show how she felt. Through her words, her looks, her sighs, and even the things she left unsaid, she hinted at the state of her heart. But Fernando, no longer moved by her presence, failed to notice these signs even when they were painfully obvious. Yet someone else did notice: her husband, the young and somewhat simple-minded Soars. Though not particularly clever, Soars had begun to realize that something was off with his wife. His suspicions started during a serious conversation about 2 new styles of facial hair, something he cared deeply about, and discussed with great passion and detail. He noticed how little interest Fernanda showed in his arguments. Paying closer attention, he became convinced that whatever was on her mind had nothing to do with him. As a careful husband, he decided to find out the cause and the object of her distraction. At first, his efforts led nowhere. Hurt and frustrated, he confronted Fernanda directly. But instead of clearing up his doubts, she only confused him further. She responded with fake outrage, scolding him as if he had insulted her honor. Fernando felt it was time to step back and watch what would happen next. Things were like that when Madalena's relative, the one who had taken Fernando to Europe, threw a party to celebrate his wife's birthday. Fernando, along with Soars and Fernanda, received an invitation. As mentioned before, Fernando now went to such gatherings on his own, drawn by a natural wish to keep his mind lively. But this night promised something more than just another pleasant evening. When Fernando arrived, it was around 11 o'clock. A young woman named Teresa was singing at the piano. She was 22, tall, pale, with dark eyes and black hair. Everyone called her Teresa. He got there just in time to hear the entire song she performed, full of passion and emotion. When she finished, soft applause filled the room. In the middle of all the excitement and chatter, Fernando instinctively walked across the room and offered Teresa his arm to guide her back to her seat. At that moment, the angel of fate wrote yet another love story into the book of hearts, the love between Teresa and Fernando. The sudden effect Teresa's voice had on him wasn't only because of her talent or emotional performance. During the first few notes, before Teresa poured her whole soul into the song, Fernando had spoken with some young men about the singer. They told him she had once loved a man who didn't return her feelings. They predicted how deeply she would sing that night, and finally, they pointed out, near one side of the room, the cold, almost mocking face of the man who had broken her heart. The similarity between their situations and emotions became the first link in Fernando's sympathy for Teresa. Her singing confirmed and deepened that first impression. When Teresa's song ended, Fernando couldn't help himself. He stepped forward to offer her his support as she returned to the chair beside her mother. Fernando couldn't stop thinking about her all night. The more he tried to forget, the more she filled his mind. By the end of the party, he had made up his decision. He had to love this woman and make her love him back. But how? Teresa still held a spark from their old flame. That's how she felt ever since she discovered Fernando's betrayal. He believed that her first love would fade, and one day both broken hearts could find each other again in a new, honest love. Together, they could prove everyone wrong who never understood them. At first, Fernanda didn't notice the change in Fernando. Let me say clearly, in case it isn't obvious yet, that Fernanda had fallen for him once more. But this time, her love was different, selfish, planned, maybe even mixed with guilt. She wanted to fix her mistake, to calm his anger and win him back. She knew he hadn't seen her quiet hints, her sighs, or the way she looked at him. He stayed blind to her silent signals. So, she decided to speak more openly. One day, when they were alone together, she chose her moment. It was a risky move, and deep down, as a married woman, she knew it was wrong. She feared what might come next. But pride can push someone very far. After some hesitation, Fernanda took her chance. Fernando, however, did not react as she hoped. When the conversation turned serious, he grew cold. He told her plainly that he could not love her again. His heart was dead, he said, and even if it came back to life, it would only be through someone purer, someone more sincere. Then he left. But Fernanda did not give up. She thought patience would be her greatest weapon. In her mind, people like Fernando only existed in books or plays, strong, unshakable, perfect. So she waited. And waited. But nothing happened. Fernando's feelings for Teresa kept growing stronger every day. Teresa, meanwhile, began to feel the same emotions that had once stirred in Fernando's heart. But time changed things. What once felt intense faded into indifference. Once the memory of first love faded, what was left? Only the need to heal old wounds. And what better way to heal than to accept the gentle help of a kind and caring hand? That's how Fernando and Teresa's love story began. Shared comfort turned into mutual affection. One day, Teresa realized she truly loved this man. When two hearts want to understand each other, even if they speak different languages, they always find a way to connect. After some time, they promised each other eternal and sincere loyalty. Fernanda was not the last to hear about Fernando's new passion. When she found out, she was devastated. If her heart had only played a small part in the love she had confessed to the doctor. And if her feelings were more about pride than true affection, it was again pride stronger and fiercer than before that took over her mind. She decided to play her final card. Unfortunately, neither her first attempt nor her last could ignite a spark in Fernando's heart with any criminal fire. Fernando's character was stronger than the men who usually surrounded Sora's wife. Thinking she could control the situation, Fernanda instead found herself controlled and humiliated. At this point, I should quote a letter Fernando wrote to a relative, the one in whose house he had first met Teresa. "My dear friend," he wrote, "you have the power to help me reach happiness, or rather, to complete it. It was in your house that I first started to find it. You know I love Donna Teresa, that fascinating young woman who was abandoned by the man she once loved. You also know the story of my first love. We are two hearts shaped by misfortune. Love may now complete our bond of brotherhood. Fernando really loved her, and nothing could stand in the way of his happiness. All he wanted was her help with the situation. He needed her support, her advice, and her help to make things work. He was eager to be happy. This was the perfect moment. To see the gates of heaven open, even just a little, and not try to step inside would be madness. He didn't want to feel regret or pain in the future. He hoped his dreams would come true, and that he would have another reason to thank her forever. 2 days later, thanks to their relatives' help, though it turned out to be unnecessary, Teresa became Fernando's fiancée. The final part of this simple story happened at Soares' house. Soares was growing more and more suspicious. He tried hard to understand Fernanda's heart and learn what she truly felt. Their marriage, from the start, had been under a dark sky. Peace had long gone, replaced by sadness, boredom, and doubt. If I had known, Soares said bitterly, that so soon you would make me taste bitterness and sorrow, I would never have fallen for you. That love was my punishment. Fernanda stayed quiet and distracted. Now and then she looked at herself in the mirror, fixing her hair or simply thinking about how cold and distant Fernando had become. Soares kept speaking in that half-sentimental tone. At last Fernanda answered sharply, angry at his doubt. She accused him of not believing her words. But it's your words I want to hear, Soares said. That's all I ask. Swear to me that I'm wrong, and I'll be happy. I've been asking for this for an hour. Fine, she said. What? You're wrong. Fernanda, do you swear this? I swear it. Then a slave entered with a letter for Fernanda. Soares glanced at the envelope and recognized Fernando's handwriting. Soares waited for Fernanda to open the letter first. After all, she had sworn she would read it. But when the slave handed her the envelope, she trembled. The handwriting was familiar, and the delicate paper felt like a secret she wasn't ready to face. Without a word, she tucked the letter away and sent the slave off. Who is that from? Soares asked. It's from Mama, she replied. Why don't you read it? I already know what it says. Oh, that's too much. Soares stood up and walked over to her. His voice was gentle but firm. Let's read it together. Not now. Yes, now. I want to read it with you. Fernanda tried to resist, but Soares wouldn't let it go. Eventually she gave in. Truth was, she had hoped, maybe even believed, that Fernando might return to her. She thought he might finally understand that her rejection had been a mistake. Her pride made her think this was still possible. So she handed him the letter. He opened it and read aloud. Mana, on Saturday the 17th, I will marry Donna Teresa G. It's a love match. Please let my brother-in-law know, and ask both of you to come celebrate this happy day with us. Your brother, Fernando Fernanda, tried to hide her shock, but her heart sank. Still, she managed to keep her face calm for a while. Soares, on the other hand, was overjoyed. He thought the whole thing had been a misunderstanding, a playful trick Fernanda had played to tease him. He kissed her and held her close, thanking her without words for the joy this letter brought him. Of course, Fernanda never attended Fernando's wedding. She claimed to be ill and stayed home. But the ceremony went on without her, and it was beautiful. Madalena was radiant, seeing her son so happy and deeply in love. 3 years have passed since that day. Fernando and Teresa's marriage is like a paradise, peaceful, full of joy, untouched by jealousy or pain. They live like the first man and woman, without a trace of the serpent's whisper or the bitterness of forbidden fruit. And Soares and Fernanda? They too found happiness again. After some time, their early days of sweet affection and playful love returned, as if they were falling for each other all over again. If any reader thinks this story lacks excitement, let them reflect on these words that Fernando often repeats to his friends who visit him. I've achieved one of the rarest things in the world. Perfect harmony of intentions and feelings between two people who were raised apart and remained separated and unknown to each other for a long time. That's because they both learned their lessons in the school of misfortune. At least in this, you can see a saying come to life.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.